remind everybody again that we are streaming live the session, and we'll also be uploading the entire session on YouTube in a day or two. And we'll also be writing a report. My research assistants are working on it as the session goes on. And now we have the last speaker, not the least, China's position and strategy in the South China Sea dispute. And we have Captain Sarabjit Singh from Mao to speak on the issue. I know China, because of its vast claim area and the 9-9 history, has been the most talked about country in the South China Sea dispute. So now the floor is yours for 15 minutes.
You are a very strict headmaster, sir. He said no lunch, so just keep it short. Thank the university and the center for this opportunity. My first visit here, I'm overawed, a little hesitant in speaking. I just landed up from Mumbai a week back, so I'm still getting used to the change in temperature. And I'm back to academics after a hiatus of 4 years in uniform. I was an idea earlier. Okay, set the ball rolling. I get this one correct. Right. Now this is the South China Sea. Abhijit mentioned black holes. These are the smaller black holes that start with it. And if I've got the pointer right, here we are. Right from the southeast to Natuna, I'll take it to these are the reefs, Spratly Islands, Scarborough Reef, Macclesfield, Paracels, and up to Pratas, there in the northwest. This is the area of South China Sea dispute. 6 nations are there in it. And Spratlys, and incidentally, none of these islands have any indigenous population. That is a fact. And I'll come to Article 121, which is referred to about the regime of rocks a little later. Quick run through what is the dispute about? It's about sovereignty and territorial issues, resulting in overlapping maritime claims, which have affected the aspects of freedom of navigation and overflight. Dr. Swaran Singh mentioned features. This is what is occupied. We got China in 8, Vietnam in 29, Taiwan in 2, and incidentally Taiwan occupies the biggest Ituaba and has claims to be the oldest occupant of any island dating back to the 70-71. Philippines 8, Malaysia 8, Brunei nil. Small country, doesn't have too much of maritime capability. This does not include any reclaimed islands which have been dug up from the past and developed upon. So we are looking here as these as original rocks, natural land features which the Article 121 clearly states. What are the Chinese interests in this? Strategic. You get a buffer to the mainland. What is the biggest fear? That they will not be able to thwart an invasion if it takes place, or if the US comes too close to their allies. So they want a buffer to the mainland, so they're pushing outwards. Encirclement and isolation of Taiwan, that has been the main reason for China's interest close to their border. Plus the South China Sea gives an excellent training ground for their developing maritime capabilities and military capabilities, and also offers a springboard for power projection beyond the first island chain. These are the basic Chinese strategic interests. Energy and trade as resources has already been covered. Just to give you the gas figures, what Dr. Swaran Singh mentioned, this almost equals the reserves of Qatar, which has got the largest gas reserve if they approve. And sea lines of communication are there. Essentially, India's sea lines of communication also transit through there, our trade comes through there. So therefore, if you have a certain control on this area, you have a modicum of control over energy security and flow of trade of other nations. So what makes China so assertive? We can debate whether it is the declining US power or the relative increase in Chinese power vis-a-vis the US. The sense of rising nationalism, not only in China but in most of the Southeast Asian nations as far as sovereignty and territorial issues are concerned. The most important aspect is the leadership. You are looking at continuity. Now, if there is going to be a continuity in the leadership, obviously the policies and the aspirations of the Chinese leadership is going to be pushed. And that is what I think is going to happen. So we're going to have a fun time in the South China Sea. So let's see how it works out. A weak ASEAN. My colleague Uday has already covered it. A lot of arm twisting. There's a lack of consensus in the code of conduct. And just to bring you a little back into history, when ASEAN first requested the Philippines and Vietnam to draft the first DOC, China of course threw it out of the window. Malaysia also objected, saying that it is too legally binding. Now that is the blockage. So it is not only China, all of these nations have a vested interest in doing it. And of course there are internal differences in ASEAN itself. 6 of the nations are not party to the dispute, so they have very little to say. They have been covered up there. A lot of arm twisting. The 2012 communique, in fact, if there was something that was missed out, that there was no mention made of the South China Sea dispute, apparently a lot of arm twisting took place in the back corridors of the ASEAN meeting there, and of course China reigned supreme. What is the result? You are having a power transition and a shift in the balance of power. And that is what is happening. And that is where the ball is going to stop, and that is where the new ball will start rolling depending upon who turns up winners in the power transition. This is a diagram dated 1958 by Organsky, where he made this inverted pyramid on the power transition. The bottom colonies row we can disregard now. This is long past. So you have the satisfied nations above the line and the dissatisfied nations beyond the line. It's a dynamic line. It depends upon the region. What I'm going to concentrate out is the middle part. Now, what is the middle part? Unlike a great power, it has lesser influence on other states, but yet has sufficient ability to shape international events. So what is China's status and position? China's economic rise, military modernization and assertiveness aids its power transition. So where do we position China in that pyramid? Let's say we put it in the Western Pacific region, which also encompasses the South China Sea as a great middle power, with greater power leanings and a dominant nation aspiration. That is where it is heading. And I'll put a final ending to this when I look at the last slide at the prognosis. I just want you to keep this in mind. So this is what is leading it on. The Middle Kingdom wants to grow and expand. What has been the shift in stances so far? In 1998, when you look at the military white papers, there was a focus on modernization, economic security, and the national policy was defensive, what they termed active defense. Let's fast forward to 2015, the first white paper on military strategy. From active defense, they've come to offshore waters defense with open seas protection. There is a calling for security overseas interests. There is a calling for preparation for military struggle. There is a continued military modernization. There is stress on informatization and the development of a cyber force. The ambit has increased, and it will only keep on increasing. I'll take you to China's A2AD, which is in consonance with the 2015 one. Now, A2AD is more of a Western terminology. That is anti-access area denial. Anti-access simply means that you deny any entity entry into area of interest. Area denial means if you cannot do that, then once you are adversely in the area, you prevent that person from maneuvering into a position of advantage. The Chinese have a different term for the A2AD. They call it the active strategic counterattacks on exterior lines. Now this is a Chinese strategic concept. It is similar to the A2AD concept that the West calls it. The catalyst was the Taiwan crisis of 95-96. If you remember, 95-96 series of missile firings across the Taiwan Straits. The US President sailed into carrier strike groups. Now there is a confusion here. Apparently the CSGs did not sail through the Taiwan Straits as so claimed by the US, because they were also scared that they would get attacked by the Chinese. The Chinese were a little apprehensive. They did not know how they would be able to counter the carriers once they entered into that area. So there was sort of a standoff, a Mexican standoff between the US, the China, the rest of the world, and both stuck to their guns. But the catalyst was the Taiwan crisis of 95-96, which led to the development of subsequent military things like ASBMs, nuclear submarine, emphasis now on the carrier. So what are these main aspects of the ASCEL? First of all, it is at a strategic and it is not at an operational level. It will be conducted throughout a conflict should it take place, as far away from the Chinese mainland as possible. And it is essentially asymmetric, means against a superior adversary. So essentially it is pointed at the US and its allies, specifically the US. It is a counteract, therefore it is reactive, which means that China would not fire the first shot. It would wait. So therefore, looking at international law, it will be acting in self-defense. The main area for this would be between the first and the second island chains. If you remember, I had said strategic buffer from the mainland. Let's take a look. Your first island chain, you look at the southeastern part, it actually is akin to the 9-line. You look at the second island chain, it moves away. Now, over a period of time, with the number of exercises that China has conducted, they have managed to pierce the first island chain. And in the last couple of years, they have successfully entered the second island chain, which means they are pushing outwards, as I said, to keep the adversary far away. It suits them very fine because in the South China Sea, there will be minimum interference from outside nations, or what they call as outer variations. What you see on the right bottom is the coverage of China's Beidou navigation system. Right from the Strait of Hormuz, it goes right into the center of the Pacific Ocean. And I wouldn't hazard to guess that the military satellites would have a similar coverage, which means anything that happens in the Indo-Pacific is covered. So they have a good picture of what's happening. So this area, as I said, if you move outwards to the second island chain, is ideal for thwarting any interference in the South China Sea area. Main components are the anti-ship ballistic missile. Main targets are the US carriers. Land attack missiles, again the main targets are the airfields of the US and its allies. And at sea would be ships, aircraft, submarines, assisted by space-based assets, as I just explained on that small picture there. And land and sea-based sensors which they are developing over the various islands they are covering. Now, after the arbitration tribunal, China apparently has changed tack and has come to a 4-SHA claim. Now, SHA in Mandarin means sand. And before we go ahead, I'll just put one thing, that UNCLOS was established with due regard to the sovereignty of all states. The question on sovereignty territory issue that came out here, so this will maybe clarify that. This sentence is from the 4th para of the preamble of UNCLOS. More interestingly, it is a generally accepted principle of international law that sovereignty over land is the basis for determining maritime rights. You look at various ICJ judgments, they all point to it, including spanning from South America to Europe. So after the arbitration case, the Chinese apparently had a closed-door meeting with the Americans, and they have a 4-SHA claim where they are seeking sovereignty over 4 island groups: Pratas, Paracels, Spratly, and Macclesfield. And this is based on their law on the territorial sea and contiguous zone dated 1992. And they could claim straight baselines for generating territorial seas. I'll throw in a new terminology here, lawfare. What is lawfare? It's a mixture of law and warfare. Essentially, it's a US creation 2009 strategy of using or misusing law as a substitute for the traditional military means to achieve an operational objective. Interestingly, it was mentioned in a book written by 2 colonels of the PLA in 1999. You can also extend it to achieve your strategic objectives. How do the Chinese do it? Look at certain UNCLOS declarations the Chinese made with ratification of UNCLOS, reaffirming its sovereignty over all its archipelagos, islands, etc., based on the 92 law. This was upon ratification of UNCLOS. Secondly, the provisions of the UNCLOS concerning innocent passage through the territorial sea shall not prejudice the right of a coastal state to request in advance notification. Nothing surprised about it. We have the same sort of language in our MZI Act of 1976, in which we seek prior approval. We're on the same page as the Chinese are concerned on a lot of these issues. Chinese regulations for maritime spatry fisheries product. They define the waters in the 9-line south of 10 degrees latitude as Spratly Islands, and therefore issued licenses for fishing anywhere in these waters, which led to standoffs with the various nations, especially Philippines. The 2012 Hainan Maritime Regulations applicable to ships entering waters illegally, specifically territorial waters, which essentially meant that if you did not take permission, you are illegal. And it catered for action to be taken on 6 occasions. You can look through this act, it's all regulations, it's given in that. They also proposed changes to the 84 Maritime Safety Law. From 53 articles, they wanted increased to 134, delineating of various zones, including forbidden zones and areas of military use, which means that you're restricting the sea area, which comes to the area canal part. And reiterates requirement for permission for foreign military vessels prior entering China's territorial seas. What we also see, the frequently challenging of warships and the military aircraft. Last Friday, they challenged 3 Australian naval ships entering to Vietnam. So that is a continuous affair. A little on the force levels. This is what I've got from the military balance of 2018. This is what they can put into force in the South China Sea and beyond. They have built 83 ships in 8 years. There has been a reduction in numbers, but an increase in tonnage, which essentially means they are taking out old ships, but bringing in long endurance ships, which means their staying power at sea is much more. These are supported by tankers and possible refueling facilities at reclaimed islands. Therefore, they can deploy sufficient assets in the South China Sea and up to the second island chain with adequate support. They are in the Indian Ocean region already with their anti-piracy support forces, so they're expanding. Additionally, the placement of the Coast Guard recently under military controls gives more flexibility for planned operations in distant areas, which means you hand over the custodial duties to the Coast Guard under military control and let your naval ships move out. I love this map for the simple reason is that let's assume for once the Paracel Islands dispute is over. If you were to give these 4 islands, Spratly, Itu Aba and Scarborough Reef, they are full maritime zones. You will have no high seas in the South China Sea. But since the arbitration tribunal has said that these are all rocks and therefore cannot generate an EZ, limiting it to territorial seas and contiguous zones, those circles get reduced along those pop marks. Therefore, when you enter the South China Sea, it's going to be like walking over sharp pebbles barefoot. And navigation will become a problem. And that is where the challenging part of the maritime jurisdictional issues of China come up. What is the prognosis? China's national strategic goal is realization of the Chinese dream for achieving the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, straight from the 2015 military strategy paper. Start point is the emergence of China as a dominant nation in the region in lieu of the US. We'll go back to the power transition issue. Continue the military modernization, continue PLA reforms, which is more emphasis on joint operations. Theatre commands have come in, let's see how they progress. Enhance the global maritime footprint, while not forgetting to maintain an aggressive maritime posture based on its claims of sovereignty interpretation of the international law. I finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Parma. You finished in 16 minutes. Just 1 hour, 1 minute above the time given to you.
Got carried away, so one drink.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. Yeah, okay. All right, before we go on to a Q&A session, I would like to acknowledge the presence of my colleague, Shasha, from School of International Affairs, and also Dr. Masuru Mukherjee is here. She is Executive Director of Center for Comparative and Global Education. Thanks for coming. And also my students, all former students and current students. Thanks for your presence again. Now what we are going to do is we are about 15 minutes behind the schedule. I mean, is it over? Okay, is it 15 minutes? Around 10? Around 10, 15 minutes. But anyway, we can spend another 30 minutes for Q&A session. So what I'm going to do is, first invite 4 questions. Then we'll have about 3 rounds of Q&A session. And I already have about 8 students who have submitted their questions in advance. I'm going to call them out the names, and you please stand up, identify yourself, so that the speakers know who you are. What's your name, which school you belong to, and what batch. And then in the 3rd round, I will take questions from the audience. The first and second round will be people who have submitted their questions in advance. Okay, first I would like to invite Soumya, who is a research assistant from in Center for Southeast Asian Studies. Please identify yourself and also tell which your question will be addressed to which speaker. Okay?
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for those wonderful insights. My question is directed towards Professor Uday Bhanusen. So you spoke on the ASEAN perspective, and I just wanted to inquire if the unity in the ASEAN organization as such will play any significant role, especially when Philippines seems to be a victim of Chinese aggression, and Philippines will also be heading the ASEAN-China dialogue from August 2018. So will the unity in ASEAN organization have any role to play in the conflict resolution?
Okay, the second person is Sagun. Question?
My question is towards Mr. Abhijit. Is China's coercion and inducement strategy, specifically through economic incentive, the main hindrance to achieving ASEAN unity in the South China Sea? Is this responsible for the commitment or the lack of countries like Cambodia and Laos in ASEAN space?
Okay, the third one, Sahima.
So my question is to Abhijit sir. So in your talk you mentioned about Australia. So if you could just elaborate a bit more on the Australian policy on the South China Sea dispute and whether it has been consistent over years or if it has changed and how.
And the fourth one from Versa. The question.
Good morning, professors, and thank you so much for a wonderful talk. I have a few questions, and one of them being considerate.
Can you limit to just one question? Just choose one of them.
So can I ask the rest of the questions in the third round?
If we have time. But for now, only one question.
Okay, so my question is to you, sir, Dr. Uday. On what parameters can ASEAN as an institution grow? It is in addition to what Soumya already asked, that considering like whatever she asked, and my question inherently is on what parameters does ASEAN has the potential to grow as a regional institution to contain or at least try to contain China?
Okay, the speakers. Who wants to go first? That.
I think the question which most of you are seeking an answer to is about ASEAN's centrality and whether the organization which was formed way back on 8th of August 1967, whether after 50 years of its formation it is losing steam, and whether ASEAN can play an important role in the South China Sea dispute. The main thing about ASEAN that we need to remember is that all decisions are taken by consensus. An important aspect of ASEAN is their whole concept of consultation amongst themselves. It's called Mashwara and Mufakkar, and that is what these countries, the 10 countries of ASEAN, are known for. So, in a kind of a tribal kind of a setting, you know that all decisions are arrived at unanimously. The same kind of thing has been carried forward by ASEAN. And when it was founded, it was a smaller structure, but from 5, from 3, it has grown to 10, and it has included countries which are not economically so advanced. The Indo-China countries, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam were amongst those who joined much later. Now, the problem about the Indo-China countries, especially a country like Cambodia and Laos, Vietnam is case sui generis. It is a very nationalist country. But the other countries of Indochina are susceptible to influence by China, which is the dominant power in the region and with which they share their common border. So because of that and because of the economic clout, the military clout of China, they have not been able to exert their influence. So this is the weak spot of ASEAN, and China has exploited this weakness of ASEAN, and as I mentioned in my talk also, 2012 they were able to prevent ASEAN from issuing a joint communique. Now, things like conflict resolution is a problem with ASEAN. We must remember that ASEAN should not be compared with a Western organization like the European Union, which is developed in a, which has a different, has had a different trajectory. ASEAN is developing in its own way. Its own consultation has its own plus points, its own advantages, and I think I'll leave it at that. On what parameters can ASEAN grow? That was the other question. I think one thing that all the ASEAN countries are agreed about is that they do not intend to contain China. I think that is not something which is, they plan to coexist with China, and that is what makes the relationship with China somewhat complicated. And China, because of its influence over the smaller ASEAN countries, which I mentioned, Cambodia specifically, has been able to influence ASEAN's growth. Now, if ASEAN wants to grow further and it wants to grow from what it has been, then it has to utilize its interlinkages with the other major powers. One great feature of ASEAN's interactions is that it has been able to engage all the major powers of the world, whether it is Canada, USA, Russia, Japan, or India for that matter. It has been able to engage them. And that is again a plus point of ASEAN, and some would say that that is also been a weakness of SAARC in the South Asian region. So there is a lot which other organizations can learn from ASEAN, and what appears to be weaknesses of ASEAN at the current stage, I would say is not really a weakness. It is an organization which is in evolution, and we will see that ASEAN will be able to overcome some of the problems which it has seen in the past, and it's evolutionary and it will grow.
Right. So there were two very interesting questions for me. The first question is on ASEAN unity and how it has been compromised, as you were asking me, by this dual strategy of coercion and inducement. Let me say this very cryptically. The divisions in ASEAN are actually old. Laos and Cambodia have, for many years now, actually supported the Chinese position. And that's because they're smaller countries, weaker countries, that was the sense that China can actually support them in many ways by economic, inducements, etc. But I think what's very interesting that's happened in recent years is that whilst in the past that balance of opinion within the ASEAN was against China, because the big powers, Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, had all taken a hard stance against China because they wanted to protect their own interests. That balance is now shifting, in that the Philippines, to an extent even Vietnam, and Indonesia now, that wants so much of help from China for Joko Widodo's infrastructure projects, are all beginning to think that it's better to be on the Chinese side than it is to be on the American side. This is fueled also by the fact that there is a perception that the US is perhaps in decline, particularly under President Donald Trump, who seems to have no idea on what economic policies should be applied to this region. Now, the other factor that I think is very important and that we must take into cognizance or consideration is that the discourse within China of what it means to be a dominant maritime power in the region. A couple of years ago, actually, in the 18th Party Congress in 2012, there was a discussion in China that was monitored by all of these small countries on what it takes to be a maritime power. And the Chinese realized that it's not about just physically dominating that space, it is having the ability to manage the strategic dynamic in that space. So you should be able to nurture that space, you should be able to exploit that space, you should be able to in some ways protect that space and control the dynamic in that space. Now the Chinese are going all out. They've taken what I would typically call a no prisoners taken approach. That we are simply going to go out there and underline our prominence and our preeminence in the region. It is working for China, and it's working because a lot of these countries now are beginning to shift together. Now this is classical hedging, we could call it. They perceive that at this moment it's perhaps better not to sort of oppose China and not be seen on the US side, but it could very soon change if you have a new US president and if you have the other, if you have some other dynamics that come together in a way that support the ASEAN, maybe this will change. The second question to me was on Australia's policy. In 2013, let me just say, up until 2013, Australia was really a typical US ally. It simply followed US foreign policy in the region. Since 2013, when they came up with their first white paper, and after that, now recently they've come up with a foreign policy white paper and a defense white paper. They have a clear sense of their place in the Indo-Pacific region. Now the Australians are the biggest proponents of the whole term Indo-Pacific, and the way the Australians see this, that this is primarily a kind of a balancing strategy in which you can somehow, if not contain the rise of China, at least draw the red lines for China to let it know that there is a cost for what it is doing. But the Australians now realize that this is a moment wherein the US they might have to start preparing for a post-US order, which is that if Donald Trump's policies don't quite succeed, he has given no indication that his policies are going to be successful. If it all does not come together well, will they be able to make something? This is the word that was said sometime back, middle power coalitions. Now, middle power coalitions means will they be able to work with India, Japan, and the others? And therefore, the Australians are now taking a harder stand on South China Sea issues. Plus, understand, the Australian establishment has been completely infiltrated by China. There is a great deal of angst within Australia in the way their media, their educational institutes, some of their politicians. I'm sure you all heard of Sam Dastyari and the controversy surrounding him. What happened with Sam Dastyari? He was, in a sense, bought over by the Chinese, and so within Australia there is this feeling that if they now don't assert themselves against China, the Chinese will, in a sense, completely compromise their politics, and therefore there is a movement that we see happen. So for us, I think it's a good thing that the Australians and the Japanese are taking a lot of interest in the Indo-Pacific and in this whole discussion on the South China Sea, because this means that even if the US does not stand to provide support to this to the Indo-Pacific strategy, we have other partners to work with. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Now, before we go on to the second round of Q&A session, I just want to tell our students that Abhijit is from ORF, Ocean Research Foundation, Paramari is from National Maritime Foundation, and Uday is from IDSA, in case you want to pursue some kind of internship program or future job prospects. So it's a good time to catch up with them, talk to them, and get their contact information. So I just want to remind our students who are present today. And for the second round, let me first call on Mr. Gonpo. He is a student in my South China Sea disputes class. And the second, Tahira. And the third, Kunga. The fourth, Anuradha. So please take, tell your question is directed to which speaker?
Good afternoon. Actually, my question is brief, pre-made question. So it was very much answered by Sir Abhijit Singh right now. And my question is related to the statement made by the last speaker, Captain
Parma.
Captain Brahma, sir. So regarding the counterpart for the counterpart in South China Sea dispute, would the U.S. military navy present in the South China Sea dispute ever be justified? And what would be the ramifications of the United Nations if the armed conflict broke out between the claimant states? These two are my questions.
Can you please repeat?
What would be the military presence?
What would be the military presence?
Yeah. What would be the would the military presence of United States in a South China Sea ever be justified? This is the first question. And the second is, what would be the ramifications? What would be the reaction from the United States if the armed conflict broke out between the claimant state in the South China Sea dispute? Thank you. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I just want to remind the students as well, the speakers, to be precise as much as possible. Okay, just again, Tahira, Pula, and Anuradha.
Good afternoon. My question is for Vijay sir. I'm interested in the environmentalist aspect of the South China Sea. So my question is, when a country creates a management policy regarding the environment, the policy doesn't work because if the other countries follow this policy, it would be seen as accepting the authority of the other country. So for example, when China levies its annual ban on fishing, the other countries tend to violate it. So in an issue like this, what steps can be taken to manage the environment such a transnational subject? So that's my question.
Good afternoon. So my question is directly related with Abhijit sir on territorial disputes. So all the suburbs of the conflict is coming from Taiwan in the Great Power Rivalry. Taiwan independence is so much tied in the South Sea China that is 90% of the Chinese claim will be null and void if Taiwan get independence, because they claim to be the owner of everything. But due to the one China policy, this has not been discussed openly. So if Taiwan become independent, China will not have the historical rights that they are claiming now as a basis. So, and even if Taiwan get independence, America will dominate the region with military force much more than now. Yet in the international politics, Taiwan doesn't want to be a province of China. So my question is, why Taiwan doesn't want to have an independence in the context of South China Sea disputes?
My question is directed to Mr. Vijay. As he mentioned that coercion and inducement strategy, because I've been writing a paper on the strategies used by China. So it's directed towards the delaying strategy which is used by China, in which it has successfully over the past years maintained its position in the claimed area by buying time in order to claim effective control as a title if it is dragged to the courts. So if now it is dragged to the court, will this claim of effective control by China be held valid, even though that we know that they are maintaining this static position in the disputed region unlawfully?
You know, repeat that. Because the drag to the court means what?
Dragged to the court.
Dragged to the court.
Yes, sir. If it's dragged to the court,
Okay.
if it's dragged to the court and China claims on the basis of effective control through the usage of the delaying strategy, which it has been practicing over a period of time now.
Yeah.
So will this be held valid? Because even though they are having an effective control for this period of duration, long duration, but it's through unlawful means that they are maintaining the position in the disputed region.
Okay, Abhijit, you go first. Do you have more
Yeah,
questions?
so there's a couple of questions for me. Right, so let me just try and answer the questions that were asked. The first one was, is military presence in, that's your question. So the question for me was the environmental aspects of, historically, your question was environmental. Historically, there is only consensus that can drive nations to work together on the environment. the arbitral tribunal was very clear about the fact that what China was doing in the Scarborough Shoal, which lie within the Philippines EEZ, amounted to a violation of Philippines' rights, as also the fact that this was in some ways harming the ecology of that region. And therefore, the Chinese were asked to desist from carrying out those activities. Now, the Chinese did comply initially with at least that part of the verdict, that they were physically present in those waters, but they were not doing the kinds of exploration in that water that would again amount to a violation, or that would in some ways repudiate the findings of the court. The UNCLOS, we have to understand, is actually not very strong on environmental issues, because the UNCLOS was essentially drafted to sort out these overlapping claims of nations, and it takes a concrete stand on what are your territorial waters, what's the EEZ. Even on the matter of the EEZs, there was no consensus among the drafters of the UNCLOS, and therefore the EEZs also, the rule of the EEZ actually preserves some of the high seas freedoms for the user states in those waters, which creates the confusion. Because if the user states can use those waters, in some ways they are also polluting those waters, even though pollution comes directly under the ambit of the responsibilities of the coastal state. So environment is a vague area, and the Chinese have, for instance, with the Vietnamese and with some others, actually have some agreements in which they decide to do certain things or not do certain things. But I believe that the UNCLOS will not really be able to provide much guidance when it comes to issues of environment. And the Chinese might be the biggest culprits in the way that they are harvesting the sea clams, etc. I'm sure you all heard of that. But the other nations are equally culpable or guilty of this. And I think unless there is a discussion on now, this is a low-hanging fruit, by the way. Nobody has a problem with actually talking about environmental issues. Yes, it hurts some interest because you'll not be able to economically exploit that region as it will. But it's not as contentious as the territorial issue, so it can be done. You don't have to force the UNCLOS or the arbitral tribunal or any other court to pass an adjudication or a judgment to further the stand taken by some of these states in the region. Second question was on Taiwan's independence. Taiwan is independent in the sense that it makes its own policies, but it is part of China. India recognizes that Taiwan is part of China. I don't think the Chinese are going to seek control over Taiwan anytime soon. I also think that the presence of the US in those waters is going to continue. The US, we have to understand, has been the principal security provider in those waters for all these years. And just because the Chinese are indulging in a show of force does not mean that the US is going to go home anytime soon. So I think that this delaying strategy that was being mentioned in the way the Chinese are using it. What's interesting is that there is a rebalance happening within the Chinese system, in that the Chinese were earlier using a lot of maritime militia to do these activities, but the Chinese Coast Guard is now under the military. The Chinese Coast Guard has now come under the People's Armed Police, and there is a sense that you get that the Chinese are going to be militarily dominant in this region. So the delaying tactics, they don't have to sort of resort to any delaying tactics, because they are making a very clear case that we have stakes in the region. We don't need to do salami slicing. We will send in our military forces to do what's needed. Does that answer all questions, or was there another one? Was the question on the decline of the US? Did someone ask me that?
Presence of US in Europe.
The presence of the US in the world, but that I've answered. That the US is not going to go away simply because China has a problem with the US being there. The US has been a dominant power, and the US will continue to be there. I think we've got to give this a little more time. because this is an evolving scenario. At this moment, the Chinese are on the ascendant, but that's also because Donald Trump's policies aren't working so well in the South China Sea. But if we, and in the Asia Pacific, but if we give this more time, I think there's going to be a rebalance that will happen. And there is going to be a resetting in ties between India and the other players. And let's see how things happen from there.
To add on to the US presence, you must understand that the US has certain obligations to its allies, right, which includes coming to their protection and defense should there be a shooting war. Right? And that's the reason why it justifies its presence in the South China Sea. That's one point. Second point is, although the US is not a signatory to UNCLOS, it is said that it will follow it in the letter and spirit, which goes against the grain of signing a convention, but yet it supports US interests in the Great Economy. That's one issue. As far as there are certain conflicting issues. Please remember that UNCLOS, when it was signed, the ratifying nations were expected to have national laws that would support the UNCLOS aspects which were covered. As far as we are concerned, we had an MZ Act of 1976 which predates UNCLOS but is in the tenor of UNCLOS for the simple reason it was drafted by people who attended all the meetings of UNCLOS at that point in time. Certain nations have not done it. Nations who haven't done it actually again interpret the law as they want to do it. We also do the same even though we have NZI Act. And that is where the issue comes in, that even though there is freedom in the EZ, the issue of military activities has not been addressed. It was discussed during the various proceedings and the meetings of UNCLOS, but due to the differences of opinion between those who wanted it, added some restrictions on military activities, which actually meant nations who got independence after World War II were one group, and the Western nations were another group. Then, of course, there's a lot of backroom brawling and arm twisting that took place. And therefore, there is this grey area of what amount of military activities are acceptable. That is why when you read the declarations, including the Indian declaration, we also say that military activities are not permitted in the EZ. So therefore, when the US justifies its presence in the South China Sea, it interprets the law that's saying whatever is applicable in the high seas is applicable in the EZ of nations. So the justification of US staying is on three accounts. One is its interpretation of UNCLOS. Second, its advocacy of freedom of navigation and overflight. And thirdly is it has to be there to support its allies, and it goes as per its binding with agreements with its allies, specifically South Korea, Japan, and Philippines. With Vietnam, let's see how it works out. They're getting cozier again. Second question was reaction of the UN if there was a war with claimants. Well, please remember, we are talking about, if you're looking at two main nations, that's China and the US, both are members of the Security Council. Take a leaf from the Korean War, see what happened that time. I think, God forbid, if there is a war by claimants, it's going to be China that is not going to fire the first shot. It may instigate somebody to fire the first shot. I go back to what I said. It will react in self-defense or claim to act in self-defense. And it's only going to happen in case the US steps in. I don't see any other nation going to war over a rock, especially with China. They know that they don't have the capability to do it. Neither with China, by the way. China will not want to do it because it has an international image to stand up. The UN reaction, if you ask me, is going to be highly muted. Because you're going to have Russia standing by the side of China. You must remember they have done a number of exercises there. And most of them have been amphibious. And the first time the Chinese actually did an amphibious exercise was with the Russians. So you have this area growing about, and it's a highly nuclearized area. We've got 3 declared, 1 undeclared nuclear power sitting in this region. It's a parquet. So as far as possible, I don't see any conflict coming about.
So unfortunately, Professor Vora has a private engagement, so we would like for him to present all our panelists with a memento for a token of appreciation. And after this, we'll have a third round of questions for the panelists.
this and the Arab world. This I will coordinate with my colleague on how we can have 1, 2, 3, 4, people who can go participate. This is one. My question is, yes, the United Nations and so on, and the role of the United Nations in this 21st century, which is unipolar world, which is the Americans are dominating everybody, and even they say openly, we don't care whether the United Nations Security Council resolutions, the veto members' opinion, central strategic issues, we will do what we want. We will lead the world. How do we see the future of these such regional, very sensitive in South China Sea issue after the Middle East? I believe the answer, and my colleague will tell me, and thank you very much. Okay.
If I remember, I'll tell you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Professor Mora, for joining us for this session. And now we would like to continue with the third round of Q&A session. And I heard somebody, Dhananjoy. Okay, first let's invite Dhananjoy. Please tell the speaker you are directing the question to. And next is Varsha has another one. And Subhan.
So my question is towards Captain Kumar. So my question is,
Can you stay close? So that everybody hears.
So my question is, can Quad be seen as a leading power to counter Chinese aggression in the region? And if so, does it undermine the influence of ASEAN in any way?
Sasha?
Sir, knowing that China does not want to internationalize the issue, it wants to solve the issue bilaterally. So can we assume that China is insecure about the historical claims or whatever claims it bases upon for claiming South China Sea? That's to a panel. To the panel.
Maybe some more relevant to you.
So my question is to Professor Abhijit. So you talked about how that India needs to take a stance. Do you think after the recent developments of Doklam, India is finally going to take a stance? Because whatever has been happening, like everyone has been, like Delhi stood its stand and it did not back off, even after many provocations and talks between Beijing. So do you think that now Japan and Vietnam are also going to take Delhi seriously and we're going to take a stand? Also, I have one more question towards Captain Sarojit. So do you think that the energy requirements of China and US, like what do you think, how much do that motivate their involvement and in the South China Sea dispute? And is there some strategic concerns too? Like what would be the composition of their interest in the dispute? Like that would be the question.
All right, we'll try to take one or two more questions. Anybody? Okay, Versa, you have the second question? Okay, yeah, you can.
Sir, just like other claimant countries, Indonesia does not claim to be a claimant in the region, whereas it has conflicting claims regarding the Natuna Islands and the area surrounding it. So, on what basis does Indonesia claims to be a mediator and not a claimant in the region?
Who wants to go first?
Thank you. Okay, what? Shinzo Abe, sometime back, called something called the diamond. In 4 nations. Diamond national debt. Okay. Now we are looking at the Quad. In fact, during the Nigeria dialogue, we had service chiefs from India, the naval chief, the Indian naval chief, the Australian, Pacific commander was there, right? And so you had these 3 gentlemen there, and you had the Japanese also. So actually you had all 4 sitting there, naval chiefs. Okay. So the Quad is yet to develop. Now the question is, first of all, I don't think it's going to be undermine ASEAN at all. That's one issue. ASEAN is specific to the nations in that area. What you're looking at, the nations who are surrounding ASEAN with a specific agenda in mind. Whether it will be successful, it will depend upon how the governments of these four nations take it up. I have not seen much headway with the Indian government taking it up. Australia is too wrapped up with China on economic and investment issues. If you see the way Australia's white papers go from being anti-China, it came to pro-China, to neutral in between. So that's the way it is. So if it has to be pushed, it has to be pushed by the US and Japan. I don't see the US also taking too much interest in it right now, obviously because the leadership has changed. And now we've got Xi Jinping maybe for life as possible. It depends upon how the life expectancy goes. But the Quad is yet to develop. It's too premature to say anything. It's still crawling. It's not even started walking. Give it some time. We can then maybe have a look at it. Historical claims you had asked. First of all, the tribunal rejected China's 9-9 on historical claims. There is a methodology in which historical claims go by. Lot of claims of other nations, and the tribunal was very clear that you cannot have a historic claim if you come and go. You've got to be there permanently. And as I mentioned, none of these rocks have any indigenous people. So any historic claim based on presence or because you keep coming and going is not going to be acceptable. And China goes for a bilateral issue because it speaks from a power strength. The moment it goes into multilateral, the whole effort gets diluted. Coming to the same Indonesian and Natuna claims, Indonesia was okay till the time China became a little belligerent in the Natuna oil field. If you remember, there was an incident where they actually had a face-off with the Chinese vessel. So Indonesia may claim to be neutral, but it also realizes that if it stays quiet for too long, the Chinese will become assertive and start entering. After all, it's Natuna oil, gas fields, whatever oil fields. And that is one thing that is part of the golden triangle. So it's not going to stay. It's already started being a little vocal. But of course, the maritime globe golden fulcrum has faltered in between it. You see how it goes by. Energy requirements of China and the US. The US has no per se energy requirements going into this, but China has. So therefore, China's Malacca dilemma, it's not only Malacca dilemma, it's also Sambok and it's also the other states' dilemma that takes place. So the issue is China is more worried about it. Now it may be building pipelines all over. It's got an existing pipeline from in Myanmar coming right up to the main site. It's looking at say the BRI or that pipeline there. But you must remember that these are overland and these are through national territories of other nations subject to the national laws, the vagaries of nature, one, and also any instability in those regions are. So the sea lane is going to be the most. What one VLCC can deliver in one day is much more than any pipeline can deliver. There are limitations. So China has more worry about the energy security part of this. And therefore it is a major issue as far as its worries are concerned. It can look from anywhere. Even if you go through the Arctic, it's not going to be cost effective. So it's going to be mainly from the Malacca states or the Lombok and Sunda states.
So, Professor, is there difference in strategic concerns in the area?
Hold on. So, we'll just go to next because we are running out of time. Please, can you name our...
Right. So there was two questions asked to me, and let me just answer this in as few words and as quickly as possible. You know, in international relations, we often use the terms geopolitical and strategic interchangeably, but they're really quite different. Now, this question about India's stand on South China Sea. Our stand, I believe, is more geopolitical than it is strategic. Now, why do I say that? I say that because essentially we look at the South China Sea from an Indian Ocean lens. What matters for us really is that if China remains bogged down in the South China Sea, it will not be able to project power in the Indian Ocean region. Our domain of influence, our domain of interest in the Indian Ocean region, we don't really care what happens to the South China Sea, whether they are able to sort their differences out or not. Now, this is in the near term useful, this kind of an approach, but in the long term it's detrimental. The Modi government is being driven, I think, by three imperatives that should be known. One is a lot of trade is flowing across from the other side. Second, the Modi government somehow believes that if we have to position ourselves as a world power, we've got to take a stand on big issues. At least we seem to be taking a stand on big issues, regardless of what we really feel about them. And most importantly, this whole balance of power framework, in which China has we've got to play our game in a way that China continues to remain bogged down in South China Sea. So I think what's going to happen in the future is that India is not going to take a very strong stand. This whole thing about the reset which is happening between Modi and Xi, the informal summit and all of this is all part of this whole hedging strategy on the part of India. At times you join the Quad, show that there's lots of activity happening in the Indo-Pacific region, we have interest in South China Sea, then you suddenly do a reset and then you go to China. Make sure that a Doklam doesn't happen again. We don't really care what's happening inside. On the question of Indonesia, look, Indonesia was in charge, was the IORA chair for good 2 years. But really speaking, took no real initiative to cultivate any consensus. Because Indonesia is driven, like a lot of other states, I would say smaller middle powers, is driven by its own contingent interests. And the Indonesians were simply making the case that we need to have a framework of regionalism in which we can keep out the extra-regional powers. It does not make any sense. The reason it doesn't make any sense is because China is really, you really posit China against the US's military strength. And if you remove the US and other extra-regional powers that Indonesia puts it, you're not really getting anywhere. So I believe this whole global maritime outcome strategy, this whole, we are the sort of bridge between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, is basically about underscoring Indonesia's centrality to the Asia-Pacific domain. This is not about really sorting out the matter between all the claimant states. So I don't think Indonesia really is a really honest broker. I think this is just a little bit of posturing, and I think going into the future we need to look for other partners. Australia, I do think, is going to be a better partner to be with, because I think they are taking a strong stand on this. My final point is going to be this, and I'm going to leave it here. Look, there is a big dilemma that is facing a lot of these states in the Asia-Pacific region, and that dilemma is essentially called the abandonment dilemma on the one side, and second, the entrapment dilemma. So it basically means that we will support the big powers if you oppose China, if somehow you can oppose China and balance China. But we don't want to get entrapped into your particular nationalistic agenda. So we will be with the US. We are also making the same case to the US. We will support you in some ways. Don't get us involved into the South China Sea conflicts. As long as this dilemma is present, we will have difficulty in moving forward. So we will, again, as I said, need to look for a way in which we can have sharper policy choices. We know where our interests lie. I think we should forget about abandonment. The US is not abandoning anybody, as Captain Parmar has just said. I think they have a treaty obligation, etc. I think they want to be a big dominant part in the region. We should be putting our eggs in the American basket rather than doing a reset with China. So I don't agree with the won't. I think we've got to think through how China Sea policy again. Thank you.
So thank you for so patiently answering all our questions. On behalf of the Center for Southeast Asian Studies, General Global University, I would like to take this opportunity to express our sincere gratitude to our esteemed panelists, Mr. Abhijit Singh, Dr. Uday Bhanu Singh, Dr. Swaran Singh, and Captain Sarabjit Singh Parmar for taking time out of their busy schedules to be with us today. Your insights have truly given us something to think about, and we thoroughly enjoyed this discussion. I would also like to thank Professor Kipling for graciously agreeing to moderate this discussion. I would like to extend our gratitude to the JGU events team, Ms. Vanima Singh and Mr. Lalit Kumar, for helping us put up this interesting session. We would also like to thank our Dean, Dr. Sriram Sole, for his continued support. And finally, I would like to thank the support staff, without whom this wouldn't have been possible. Also, to all the students and to everyone else who participated in this discussion, thank you. You've been a patient, engaging and wonderful audience. I would now request our panelists to join us for lunch. Thank you so much.
May I have a quick picture?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you.